When people think of StarCraft Brood War, they think of StarCraft in general, they think of Korean esports. One of the first names, if not the first name that will leap to mind and immediately be said is going to be Boxer. In fact, even when people think of esports in general. And so it's led to this kind of trend of thinking where a lot of people, if you ask them about esports, Korean esports, StarCraft, they'll think Boxer, okay, he must have been the greatest Brood War player ever. I mean, he basically created esports. Like, we have to credit a lot of esports to him. Like, he built esports in Korea. He was the greatest esports figure of all time. You know, he was like the best champion ever. The problem with this particular prevailing belief is that, first of all, it's naive. Like, it's not actually in command of the details and the facts and the context of Boxer's career. But also that if this sort of thing is put out there, mainly I understand why, by people who weren't around during that time, or more importantly, haven't gone back and looked at these things and tried to study the context. And so they just see his stature and some of the things he accomplished and think he must have been the best. That's why he's so famous. It's okay that those people naively might think that, but one of the sinister things is that some people within the industry, especially people who were around back then who do know the context, are oddly quiet on that particular one. On the topic of Boxer, they don't want to kind of rock the boat. They don't want to say, well, that's, let's not like it, the fact that you guys are enthusiastic, but that's not really entirely true. Like, there was a better player here, and he didn't exactly build it in this way. And actually, yeah, he's important in this sense, but in others, like, some of that's not exactly like something we can credit to him. Part of the reason, unfortunately, cynically, that I think that they don't do that is that they're quite cynical. They think to themselves like, oh, well, you know, he's like a good image for esports and it's good that people think he was the best. And, you know, if it helps build esports, if it helps make it more popular, okay, I'll just stay silent on this matter, which I think is kind of bullshit, right? It's not necessary. You can put these people in a reasonable place. And so, unfortunately, Boxer, in this sense, his legacy that's built up like this has become kind of a sacred cow in esports. And sometimes I've said this jokingly, but it's kind of true. To a degree, just because of the way my personality is and the kind of the ideals that I've set my life to, I'm kind of the person where I guess it's just my purpose to gore these sacred oxes of the esports community. And so in this particular case, we're going to look at the context of Boxer's career, his legacy, the things he did for esports. And we're going to try to get a realistic context on it so we can get it within bounds, and we can see what he was very good at, but we can also see where people have gone too far there. Because what's interesting is the reason why I say I find it suspicious that people within the StarCraft and within esports haven't kind of like pricked a few holes in that overinflated balloon of Boxer's legacy is that they have done it with certain other players. A really good example would be, because the two other names that stick out in memory as similar places, like great players in their games, some of the best ever, but not the best, but whose names carried their games forward, would be Heaton from Counter-Strike and Fatality from Quake. Now, in the case of Heaton, nowadays, actually, fans tend to have a better sense of that. No, there's not many fans actually think Heaton was the greatest. He's definitely one of them, but they know that other names were. In terms of Fatality, since a lot of people didn't like his persona, he seemed a bit cocky. He was very American in that sense, so people like that kind of like anti-American vibe that permeates the modern world due to like thoughts of imperialism and post 9/11 and all that sort of bullshit. It's fashionable to kind of dislike Americans and dislike that kind of attitude of like thinking you're the best. Okay, so people don't have any problem poking, like industry people don't have any problem kind of shit talking for talent and go, no, he wasn't the best, and you're like, don't overrate him like that, and he's just a marketing vehicle for esports. But they'll never apply the same logic over to Boxer, even though actually they share a lot of qualities in terms of their greatness, when their greatness was and how they parlayed it into these big careers and becoming figureheads for esports. They actually have a lot of qualities, all three of those names together in this sense. So when we talk about, let's go point by point. So is Boxer the greatest Brood War player of all time? Not even close. Like on any level. Like if we look at like number of titles, so that's the first place you go when you talk about the greatest players ever. You look at what accomplishments did they have? What did they accomplish? So in this sense, Boxer wouldn't even be top 5 in terms of accomplishments. In fact, if you want to just go on purely how many tournaments he won, probably not even top 6 or 7, because you can go beyond this. Now he won 3 big titles. The biggest titles that really matter historically. Now there was more tournaments in his day. The biggest titles that actually matter are OSL titles and MSL titles. These are the 2 big leagues. He won a combined 3. He won 2 OSLs and he won the precursor to the MSL, before the MSL existed. So he won 3, and then he had runner-up finishes in those tournaments in 4. So he made to 7 finals, he won 3. Okay, that's enough to make you a great champion, one of the greatest players ever, but there are a whole bunch of players with 3 or more titles. Flash has 6, Nada has 6, Jaedong has 5, Savior has 4, Ilavuv has 5, Stork has 1, but he has a whole bunch of finals as well. You can get into this realm where Boxer's actually closer to people like Fantasy, Stork, these people. Obisu has 3. He's in sort of the realm with Bisu, I guess. July has 3. He's sort of in that middle realm there. Maybe the others in terms of accomplishment are below him, but had some certain aspects of greater careers. And there's an echelon above him. The Flash, Nada, Jaedong, Xavier, Alavuv. You can't really debate those ones. They, accomplishment-wise, they've far exceeded what Boxer did. And some of them in a more competitive era. Now then, let's look at the context of those titles he had, because it is worth giving some fair due there. You can't just look at one number and go, well, he's got 5 here, and this guy's only got 3, so 5 is more than 3. No, let's look at the context, okay? So 2001 was the year Boxer really established himself as the best player. He won this Handbit Soft OSL, and then there was like another smaller league that wasn't an OSL that he won around the time that kind of like kept his level up. Then he won the very next OSL, the Coca-Cola OSL, so he's won back-to-back OSLs now, the first person to ever do that. And by the way, in history, only 3 people ever won back-to-back OSLs. It was later Jaedong did it, 2009, and then 2011 to 2012, Jangbi did it. Now, over in the MSL, a whole bunch of people won 2 or more of those, some of them 3. But okay, in the OSL, he won back-to-back there. Then he finished... Oh, he won the World Cyber Games that year, which was a big event in terms of context of like cultural aspects of esports. But again, it's like 2 or 3 Koreans versus all the rest of the world. So it's still good, but it's not the same as an OSL or MSL. So it's not counted historically the same way there. He made it to the 3rd OSL final in a row, but this time he lost out. He lost to Grimto in that one famously. That was where the whole Legend of the Fall thing started. So 2001, he's had an awesome year there. In terms of StarCraft history, the first ever truly dominant year, and in terms of all-time history, yeah, that 1 year alone would be up there with some of the greatest years ever. It wouldn't be the greatest year ever. Flash in 2010 would probably be better. I could make a case 2009 for Jaedong, Nada 2003. In fact, there's a whole bunch there. It wouldn't be the best. It'd probably be like the 5th or 6th best year. It was very dominant for his era, but in the history of better competition, bigger more developed scene, no, those other ones win and a level of opponents they're playing. 2001, awesome year. He's #1 in the rankings. Everything's going great. 2002, it starts off pretty well. He won the first KPGA Tour, which is the precursor to the MSL. Then, listen, he had like a 3rd in another one of those. He finished 2nd in another OSL towards the end of the year. He lost to Reach in the final there. There was another Legend of the Fall one. He won World Cyber Games again. This time he beat Yellow in the final. He'd already beaten Yellow in 2 finals in the past. OSL 1 and a KPGA 1. Let me think. That was 2002. 2003, he's still a good player. At this point, he drops off from being the #1 ranked because Nada's come along. Nada's won like 3 precursor MSLs and an OSL, so Nada's overtaken him already in accomplishments within like the span of about a year and a half or something. He still manages to finish like 3rd in an OSL. What was it? He had some top 8s in OSLs that year. His level's still good, but he's already dropped off it. And you notice during this period, I'm not saying anything about the MSL. When the MSL came around, he wasn't doing anything in these MSLs. It wasn't until later that he'd have some like okay results in the MSL. Actually, in the MSL, which was the league that ran side by side with the OSL, it was the equivalent of if there was GSL and another league in Korea side by side, and they were playing off each other like 2 weeks ahead or behind. He was almost never in the MSLs. He was never a factor there. So he was very dominant in OSL, not so much in MSL. And by the way, MSL had the better format. So that's actually a little bit telling in itself compared to the other great players who had their big results in the MSL. Now, going forwards from that, okay, 2004, he's still, by now, he's not a great player. By now, he's sort of like top 10 to top 20 sort of ranked area. He's not making the big finals. And he's still a good player, but he's not making the deep runs. Yeah, he can finish like... He can make it to the round of 60 of an OSL, and then he has this one marvellous sort of revival run where he makes it to the ever OSL final. He loses to his student, Alavuv there, finishes 2nd place, really awesome series, but he loses out, and Alavuv is the dominant player from about the end of the previous year through this whole year. With the MSLs he's winning and wins his OSL. 2005, again, Boxer can make the odd like round of 16, but he's not making it super deep. Pro League's mainly where he's making his money here, helping SK Telecom. Okay, he makes it to another sick run. He makes it to the final of the SO1 OSL. And this time he loses another close one. He loses to Anytime, the Protoss player. Really close series, but he loses out there. And that's actually the last big final he ever makes it to in Brood War. Beyond that, okay, he has some OSLs. He's making it to like round of 16. Make the odd round of 8 in OSL, MSL. Mainly round of 16, round of 8. Like, he makes some of them, but he's never going for... He's dropped off a lot right here, because you've already had the era of Nada. You've had the era of Ilavuv. Now you're into the Savior era. After this, you're going to come to the era when Flash, Jaedong, Stalk, Bisu all come along and become the gods. the days of Boxer being the god, he was the god in 2001. And in 2002, he was still a very good player, elite level player, top 4 player in the world for sure. 2003, now he's dropping down sort of like top 8 to top 10. 2004, 2005, he's really not. He's dropped right down. He's like top 20 at best, top 30. But he'll just have the odd run. He'd have the miracle run. That's one of the interesting things that I'll get to in terms of what was so alluring about his personality. But beyond sort of like 2004, if we're being realistic, no, 2005, I guess, he did have that last OSL run. Beyond 2005, he's becoming a lot less relevant. And then he goes to the army. And then he joins this Air Force Ace team, and he never does anything significant again. At that point, actually, first, listen, he's in the fucking army, so he can't just play all the time. And then when he comes back to SC2, he's essentially just used as a mascot, just plays the odd Pro League game that doesn't matter, and then they use him eventually as a coach, and then he quits Brood War. Then he goes over to StarCraft 2, and in StarCraft 2, people have kind of overhyped his career there a little bit. He came over to StarCraft 2, and it was sold that, okay, this is a top-level Brood War player. It's Boxer, man. He's coming over to StarCraft 2. And then in the first OSL he plays in, he makes it to the round of 4, the semi-finals, and loses to the eventual champion. Oh my god, Boxer's here. No, as I just said there, that was in 2010. Boxer's last final in Brood War was 2005. His last round of 8 appearance was like 2006. So that was 4 years earlier. Well, three and a half, whatever the actual overall amount would be. 3.5 to 4 years earlier. He'd been washed up long before that. He came to StarCraft 2. There wasn't that many great Brood War players. The great Kesper players were still playing Brood War, so they hadn't transitioned. So that was kind of unfairly sold. So, okay, he had the top 4 in that GSL. What did he do after that? Well, Slayers was a good team, but that was mainly MMA. That was mainly other players doing that in that team. He had that top 3 at that MLG. He made it to the 3rd at MLG Anaheim, the one where I think it was MVP 1 and it was MMA 2nd. That's it. That's all he ever did in StarCraft 2. Even in StarCraft 2, he had a very short-lived career, actually. I don't know why I said even, because actually his Brood War career was very long. But in StarCraft 2, he didn't do a lot that adds to him being the greatest ever, okay? Now, I've kind of given you a rundown, basically, of his career there. He had some great individual success, had some good team success. So, okay, he had the titles, etc. In terms of skill, where would he have been? He wouldn't even be close to top 5 in terms of just raw skill, because there was some godlike players in Brood War. I mean, if we're talking just skill, we're going to go like, well, Nada, Jaedong, Flash to a degree, very effective skill. That's a bit more questionable, I guess. Bisu, definitely. Jangbi, these are incredibly skilled players. Unreal, some of the most skilled players of all time. Admittedly, Flash probably shouldn't be in that sense, in terms of like just raw ability and talent in terms of skill. Not even close. In terms of accomplishing the most in the competitive era, unfortunately, he competed out of all these names I'm mentioning in the least competitive era, in the time when there wasn't that many great players, and he's not competing against the other great players. In the early part of his career, where he has the majority of his big success, that's when the other gods haven't come around yet, because he's the first one. Now, the other gods all have to compete against each other. Nada was denied titles later by the likes of Isla Vuv and Savior. And then Isla Vuv, who's a god, has to play against Savior. And then Jelizurg has to play all of them. And then Flash, Bisu, Stork, Jaedong all have to play each other at the same time in their peaks, at the exact same time. Boxer was in the right place in as much as he was the first god in that sense, and he didn't really have a true rival. Yes, he had Yellow, who could actually match him, but then Yellow lacked kind of the clutch gene. He couldn't win in the big tournament that you needed to, and that also helped Boxer get more titles. So in terms of the competition aspect, no, you can't really put him up there as like greatest ever. If you want to talk about the idea that he basically made esports, man, like he built it, well, we have to ask, first of all, why is he so popular? Why was he so significant? Well, if we're going to talk about his skills and what he had as a player, he was a very creative player. Now, that's a key quality there. Very innovative, would come up with new builds, incredible new things, ballsy plays. And so as a result, that's incredibly exciting for fans. When they see that, they're going to latch onto that sort of player. Just like with Heaton. He was the most exciting player in his era, and so, like K-Sharp, these sorts of... So that's why people had to watch this guy. Potty, who was the best player, actually, in Heaton's day in CS, was the clutch player who just did everything textbook. He created the techniques that everyone did. In this sense, actually, it was similar with Nada and Boxer. Boxer was the one who early on won, and he was flashy, and he was creative, and he was innovative. What Nada did was, he would create the like textbook just way to grind someone out and win that game, and play this one strategy, execute it properly, win on execution. And so that's considered boring. It's like the Spurs effect in basketball. Amazing, but fans in general, at least the old school Spurs, the defensive ones, people don't gravitate towards that. They want the flashy play, the Lakers style of play. They want that sort of thing, you know. Instead, Nada, he would only be famous for winning. You'd have to give him credit, like he won. Okay, I have to acknowledge greatness. The Boxer could be loved even for losing. And that's the key thing to understand, because of the way he played, the kind of flair that he had, the cockiness. Well, cockiness in terms of the way he played, not actually that cocky as a person. Cockiness in terms of willing to try the most ballsy moves, to do things like you'll be loved if you play that certain way, if you play with that kind of like abandon, that cavalier fashion. He was also very clutch. That's going to get you a lot of fans. If you're someone who, even when you're not in your era, that's the key thing about Boxer. He wasn't that great in 2004, 2005. Yeah, he made a final in each of these and lost by only 1 game, took it to 5 games against better players. I Love Uv was like dominant at the time. Anytime was actually a better player in that tournament and had the better style for PVT. But Boxer was able to take it to 5 games. Why is that? Because he was a clutch player. Like, he was a guy under pressure who was confident in himself, had composure, and who would try that ballsy, crazy move in like a game 4 that would get him back in the series, where anyone else would have just played standard and safe and been a bit scared about elimination and just gone out. He did have that, and that's a very alluring as well. Not only to fans in general, but to young people. Kids see that, and that makes you like a heroic guy. Like, oh my God, that's amazing. Like, oh, this guy can do anything. It's awesome to watch. I can totally understand that within that context. He had a great image. This was the clean-cut guy. And in South Korea especially, you better be that clean-cut guy. You better have the image. You better not be the horrible trash talker. Like when Xavier dominated, he dominated with this arrogance, this regal air of like, I'm better than you, you're nothing to me. And people hated him for it. There was people who, they couldn't wait to see this guy lose. And it wasn't until he did start to lose that people actually started to turn around and kind of love him. Because they realized what a great player he'd been. Then they could kind of cheer for him a bit. Wasn't that way with Boxer. People loved him. Even when he would finish second, he'd be the guy that people would be cheering for the most and want to see him, when they want to see him get that golden mouse for the 3 OSLs that he never got, because he finished, well, he lost 4 OSL finals in a row, never got the 3rd one, as in the finals he made it into, not actually the 4 OSLs in a row. Yeah, he was ranked number 1 for a long time. Let me think. He did win the back-to-backs, part of being clutch, etc. In terms of the great image, though, this leads into the issue of why he is a great player in the history of esports and why he did have a lot to do with building esports, but also as to why some of it wasn't entirely like down to him. As in, part of the way that he was a great player, okay, in terms of his context, was the era when he came along. Like I said, he was the first truly great player. Okay, there was a bit of celebrity that surrounded Gurr, the Canadian player, the French-Canadian player who won that first OSL because he was a foreigner. He came into Korea, he's living there, he's this exotic presence, he's a white guy, he wins the first tournament over Koreans, and Koreans are trying really hard, and then he sticks around, he's playing some more, and he's kind of got a cool atmosphere to him, he's learned a bit of Korean. Koreans ate this up, but he wasn't a godlike player in terms of like accomplishments. Yeah, he had the 1 OSL, then he had a 3rd and another one, but after that he dropped off and he wasn't as dedicated. Boxer had the whole package at that time. He came along as the godlike player when Brood War's just starting to get big. It's starting to get watched on cable television. People are starting to want to go to these big finals, and along comes like the heroic figure, the guy where like he's the most brilliant, he's come up with a crazy strategy, he's beating everyone, he's clutch, he's always coming through in the big game, he's doing brand new things we've never seen. His raw skill was crazy. At the actual, that's what's funny, when I said he wasn't the greatest in terms of skill, in his era, like 2001, 2002, he had really sick micro. It was fucking awesome. His ability to use like a vulture to hold off a bunch of Zerglings was absolutely sick. He had really nice micro. Not in the context of all of Brood War, because some gods came along later, but in that era, yeah. So this is the most exciting player, the most dominant player at that era. The player at exactly the right point in time for when Brood War's getting big. If a hero comes along that everyone can watch, it's going to be that effect of like people in the 90s watching Michael Jordan, and that getting extra people into watching basketball and the NBA that otherwise maybe they wouldn't have watched it. Maybe if they didn't have that guy to cheer for, who's the one who always comes through, the Superman type guy, the hero, if they didn't have that type of guy, maybe they wouldn't have got into it. And also the thing is, Michael Jordan also put out that clean cut image. Whether it's actually the case or not, it seems kind of debatable when you're looking at the facts behind it, but he did put on that image. Now in Boxer's case, he had it all going for him in this sense. He had such an effect in that degree that I think it did grow esports and did grow Brood War in Korea. But with that said, and by the way, if you even talk to people now, modern day people who've heard of Brood War, they played it a bit, but they didn't watch the esports scene, some of them will even say like, oh yeah, Imho Wan, yeah, like, yeah, Boxer. And then some of them will naively ask questions like, does he still play? It's like, you know, you like quit Brood War in like 2008 or something like that. Like that's the last time he was like an elite level. I don't even know why I said elite level. That was the time he was like a significant. But after that was like the mascot era, after the Air Force Ace era, and even then he wasn't that good. Like these people aren't aware of that. That's so yeah. He's obviously done a lot for esports in that sense. But that's another thing. Unfortunately, because people know that Brood War goes back a long way and that Korea is a big place for esports, some people naively think that esports started in Korea. It didn't. Like, part of why the Gur guy was able to come over and win the first esports tournament in Korea, Brood War tournament, the OSL, is because actually esports wasn't that big in Korea at the time. It was just starting to take off, and it was this television aspect that helped push it forwards. It wasn't really in place initially. In the West, we'd already had esports a number of years. Esports in the West started in, like, 97 or something in terms of the tournaments. I'm thinking of like Quake 1v1 tournaments, and then PGL, which is like Thresh and those guys, and then going into like the what am I thinking of? The CPL that had like Fatality 04. That's like the early 2000s. All of this stuff was in place before the Korean scene. So yes, it helped kickstart Korean esports, helped kickstart StarCraft, which then lasted like 12 years. So cheers for that. But not esports entirely. A fraction of esports. There still would have been entirely a massive other. Quake would have existed. Counter-Strike would have existed. Probably Warcraft 3, because Warcraft 3 came out fairly early actually and was around a long time there. Separate to Brood War. Well, it was Brood War in Korea. We had Warcraft 3 in Europe and North America, basically. So, in that sense, people give him a bit too much credit there, but you should give him credit there. Also, you have to realise, like I say, when you follow the career path that I charted there, there's a period of time there where he's gotten the fame for being the best, like Fatality, but there's periods where he's not the best anymore, but in the public eye, they think he's the best. He's still the most prominent, still the most influential. So yes, that is having an effect. That is helping keep esports big and all the rest of it. But actually, that's kind of like a very base level of it. It's like, oh, people who, it's essentially people who don't know about esports will have heard of Boxer, and they'll know vaguely about him, but they won't know any specifics. And if that's not then making them go and watch the games, that then they find out, oh, there's actually a guy Nada now who's winning everything, and he's clearly the best player ever. Oh, and then along comes I Love Uvin Savior. If they don't know that, then actually how much influence are you really having? We're talking about convincing people who don't watch the game that you're the best. I mean, not directly, but indirectly, that's what his influence was having. That's not really something to brag about that much. I mean, esports grows when people actually watch the fucking thing and are interested in it, and sponsors get value for it and all the rest of it. Not just from becoming like Pogs or like fucking Pokemon cards, like a social phenomenon, but of people who don't play it. It's only, yeah, that's kind of been oversold there in that sense. So in that particular sense, yeah, I mean, in StarCraft 2, he again did have a little bit of a revival, because that first GSL making it the round of 4 did attract massive attention. It broke, like, the actual match that broke the record for the viewing figure early on was the match he had against Nada in the semi-finals there. That really helped, obviously, and people hoped in Korea that would have a similar effect to what had happened with him in the early days, winning those OSLs, kickstarting the game and making it huge. It didn't happen in that sense. Setting up Slayers was a big deal. He got the sponsorship from Raze, invested like he got like $200,000 or something, invested some of it into making Slayers, which for his career is irrelevant in terms of he didn't accomplish much. He had a third at an LG, that's it. But beyond that, yeah, it's very important that we see like MMA came from there. One of the top 3 or 4 greatest players ever in StarCraft 2 history. Amazing player, so many championships, even extending into last year. Then you look at, obviously, you had other good players coming from that team. You had like, I think Ryong was from that team. Who else did we have? There's a Protoss player that I'm forgetting somehow. Yeah, what was his name? The guy made it to like the NASL final. I don't know, I forget, the one that lost to, oh, Alicia, there we go, the one that lost to Stefano. He came from that team. There's a bunch of good players came from that team overall. So having that effect, yeah, being the one that sets it up, that's great. People oversold it, by the way, that he like trained MMA and he was like the son of a, yeah, sort of, but not entirely. Like, people, I think, always oversold the like Boxer trained Alavuvi and Boxer trained MMA. He clearly had an impact and an effect, and maybe he could kind of counsel them on like how you play under pressure and how to be a model professional. I've no doubt. But I can't find it a bit distasteful when you give very creative, in terms of I Love Uv, you kind of give credit for his builds and his aspect to Boxer in any sense. Or in terms of MMA, just like a clutch player, a player who can just mentally put away the problems and get into like being able to compete and even beat players who are better than him, skill-wise or tournament-wise. So don't go too far. That's essentially the message of the whole thing on Boxer. Yes, a great player. On nearly every category, we can talk about top 10 definitely. Top 5 on some of them. We could have the argument and say maybe he's 5th or 6th in a lot of these different categories. In terms of most important people in esports history, yeah, top 5 of all time for sure. Definitely an important person, but don't oversell it. That's basically what I'm saying here. It's not that we're going the other way and saying we shit, but don't oversell the aspect, because you don't need to. And you don't need to kind of take the credit away from people who accomplished more, who are more skilled, who did more even for esports in some sense. I mean, actually, part of the reason why I bring that up is because on the did most for esports, he's definitely up there. He's definitely one of the top ones. But actually, I think people have oversold the idea that like him, Fatality, Heat, and Grabby, these are the guys who just did the most. Like, I think there's a lot more debate can be had on that one. They're more in a group, and they did different things in different eras and areas. But a great player. But I had to kind of strip away some of the false robes of like, well, he's not the emperor of esports in that sense. Yes, that was his persona. There was a time when he was the emperor of StarCraft, but he wasn't this dominant, glorious, imperious reign throughout all of Brood War history, and he's the guy that we have to single-handedly credit to esports. No. The Emperor's new clothes have to be shown for what they are. At this point in time, he's a bit naked within that context of the greatest ever. He doesn't have the robe, the green jacket to show that he was the best to ever play, whatever metaphor you want to use, the crown. At this point, he's just a lord, he's just a duke. He's still a great player, but there have been others who surpassed him in many senses.